So thank you, Amya. It's always great hearing you tell stories. So hello, everyone. Do you have a good time? Hmm. I had so much fun preparing this panel. You know, we don't have a lot of men in the room. I'm looking. Where are the men? Could you please stand up, guys? Come on your feet. Oh my God, do we have to? Yes, thank you. We applaud you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we will have a panel discussion, which is quite long. It is long. And it will be a lot of fun. We have 3 Superman superstars here in the room, and we have 1 rock star lady in the room who will join me on stage. So what is the flow of the program? We will start with some thoughts and presentations of the 3 panelists. Then I will ask them some questions, and then I will hand over the mic to you guys. Okay? Got my pink book, so everything will be all right. We will start with Rick, and Rick is sitting over there. Rick Zednik, please, can I have a hand for Rick? Rick has... I'm not done yet. So Rick has his roots in Slovakia and in the USA. He's the father of 2 teenage daughters, which of course influenced him a lot, and also the story that he will share with us. He is the managing director of Women Political Leaders, which is an NGO that empowers women in politics. So that will be very interesting to hear about. And he will share his story and give us his thoughts on the subject of unconscious bias. Thank you.
Shayla, thanks very much. So I do have a few slides. Those are going to be up on the screen. Is there something I can do to make that happen? Oh, the microphone's not working? The microphone's okay. Microphone's okay, I think. So just while we work that out, it's great to be here amongst so many sisters and some brothers. Hallelujah. Thank you for that. I will say, so as Shayla mentioned, I work with an organization. It's a network of women politicians around the world. So I'm used to being in a room where the ratio is a little skewed like it is here today. But still, I think between Jeff, Paolo, myself, we may form a little bit of a delegation of ambassadors from a foreign planet that are visiting you here today. But you've been really nice so far, so I think I'm going to stay a little while. Okay, that's fine. So at forums that I attend, and I've been doing my current job for 3 years, and I'm often invited to events talking about issues of gender. And in those various events, it's often raised, well, how can we involve more men in these discussions? It's a simple question, right? If it didn't refer to 3 billion people. And so this is where I want to share with you that men's perspectives on this topic are not, well, they are as varied as you might expect them to be, certainly as varied as their tastes in neckties. By the way, none of the 3 of us here today have a necktie. Shows how liberated we are. There we go. Great. Thank you. And it's not one size fits all, right? So what I want us to do is to think about men across a spectrum in terms of their receptiveness to feminism. And because I do think it requires a nuanced approach where we're going to talk about 5 different categories on this spectrum. So first, before I go any further, I want you to think of a man in your life who you think could be more involved in the pursuit of gender equality, okay? This may be your father, your brother, your partner, a colleague, your grocer, I don't care. Somebody that you have in mind that you think could be doing more than they are right now. You got some chap in mind? I hope so. Okay. All of them. Okay. Let's focus on one at a time. That's the way we'll make change in the world, right? So if we think about these 3 billion men, and maybe 100 or so considered specifically in this room, Let's think about where they fit on this spectrum, because they do require different approaches. Okay, great. Yeah, okay, I'll cue you. This is the way we'll work, right? So there's the receptiveness to feminism, right? And there's going to be 5 different groups, okay? And they will vary from thinking that feminism is an oncoming tsunami that's going to totally change life as we know it and wipe it out, or there's some who actively encourage it as a rising tide that's going to lift all boats, including their own. So let's start with group number 1. There we go. Group 1, the opponents. Okay, this is an important minority, and I do believe it's a minority of males, see feminism as an oncoming flood. And these land lovers warn anyone who may be venturing onto the water against the risk of drowning. For the protection against this existential threat, which is about to turn everything upside down, they seek refuge in the hills out of public view. When the waters wash at their threshold, they react defensively, barricading the door, or worse. This is not irrational, but nor is it constructive. And these men quietly believe and occasionally say, women are fundamentally ill-suited for leadership. That's when they're being polite. Now, if you're thinking of any world leaders, that's not the exercise. So these staunch opponents of recognizing equality between women and men will not be convinced. But nor should they be totally ignored. Keep exposing them to the message that times change and we humans evolve. Give them the Darwinism argument. Okay, next on the spectrum, thank you, are the skeptics. Very happy to live life in the land of status quo, these men might be coaxed into an occasional paddle onto the water, but don't rush them. Start by exploring the tranquility of Parody Pond before venturing through Sisterhood Straits into Liberation Lake. These men are tolerant of different views, but they have developed opinions about unintended consequences of gender equality. It's expensive for business, they may say. Or, aren't we already beyond this political correctness? I'm sure you can come up with some others as well. So rather than rock the boat, invite them to read, to listen, maybe share their own thoughts. It starts privately. Family meals and conversations with their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers, their daughters, and their sons. When they're comfortable, they can take discreet steps out of public view, voting maybe for qualified women candidates, or donating to organizations that support the empowerment of women and girls. So we got 2 of the groups out of the way. In the middle of our 5 groups are the uncommitted. These men are open-minded, willing to dip their toe in the water, but usually only briefly. They've not yet decided to commit, but they are at a tipping point. You may hear them say, of course, women deserve opportunities equal to those benefiting men. They may even concede, I agree, women have historically faced greater hurdles than men, and this should change. This signals they can be persuaded to move their support from passive to active. Perhaps they're ready to select social media posts that promote equality, or follow certain organizations or people who frequently address the topic in social media. They may even go so far as to spend a little time attending a meeting or a conference or a rally where gender is on the agenda. Now we move to category 4, the supporters. And this is where I think we're starting to talk about people who are the men in our presence today. They're happy to dive in the waves on occasion. These men are comfortable investing time for the cause. their life probably already represents a shift from traditional gender roles at home, at work, or in their leisure time. They are at ease commenting on social media or in real-life conversations, or throwing around hashtags like he for she. Now, I'm seeing a growing number of such men quietly attending meetings and rallies, but they don't speak up, preferring to avoid the risk of mansplaining equality to their female colleagues, friends, relatives. I think there's a good instinct there. But in fact, these men are ripe to be persuaded to add their voice to the growing chorus. Invite them to take the microphone at an event. You said you would call people out, so please feel free to call out some of the men as well. Encourage them to volunteer, perhaps on a candidate's campaign, a female candidate's campaign, because it's from today's supporters that tomorrow's champions will emerge, which brings us to the final category, the champions. These men are the lifeguards at Feminista Beach. They are making water safety and feminism a vocation. They're not just convinced, they're trying to convince others, either through word or deed. They already walk the walk, actively promoting gender equality in their free time or professionally, being more conscious in hiring and encouraging empowerment groups, and participating when appropriate. So in politics, the realm that I work in, you might think of Justin Trudeau or Emmanuel Macron. Sorry, or not? We can talk politics later. I would love to. Maybe you've got other examples in your own context. Anyway, identify these men, ask them to join, not just participate, but lead the discussions. Their example will signal to other men that everyone has something to gain from equality. So the proportion of men in each category varies tremendously by geography and generation. In a big heterogeneous country like the UK or Germany or the US, you'll still find many, most of them retirees, who are opponents. But you'll also find a comparatively large portion of mostly millennials or Gen Z who don't recall a world before there was a female prime minister or a female chancellor or a female secretary of state. Okay, back to that chap that I asked you to think about. Next slide. So here are our 5 categories. Have you figured out which category that person belongs in? Is he an opponent, skeptic, uncommitted, supporter, or champion? Now clearly there's not one boat suitable for all men's oars in the push for equality, but once you've sized them up, even small prompts can get them rowing in the same direction. Why invest in these allies? You'll help them, and that investment, I promise you, will pay back directly or indirectly in benefiting you. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
So yeah, you can take a seat, Rick. Thank you so much for, I have to get my little pink book there. Thank you so much for this explanation of the categories of feminism. We will go to the next speaker duo. Yeah, DSM is in the house. So Jeff and Bengushu, you may join the stage. And I think we will tell something about you guys when you're done. I think that's most of the fun, right? Your theme will be reforming the default men, right? Please join the stage.
Thank you. If I was nervous before, following Rick, and now, of course, you're judging where I am on this spectrum, thank you. Before I start, I feel I should perhaps say a couple of words about DSM, for those who don't know who we are. a Dutch multinational, leader in nutrition, climate change, and in circularity. A little bit around women in leadership in our company. Our supervisory board is 50-50. Our executive committee is 3 out of 7 are women. The sustainability advisory board that I'm accountable for also is 50-50. And in my own personal team, only 3 of the 10 are men. So I hope already I've got some credentials which kind of move me a little bit along there. But why reforming default man? Does the term default man resonate with people? Not at all. Okay. So you've got one standing in front of you. I'm white, I'm middle-aged, I'm middle income, I'm heterosexual. That's default man. And people like me have been defining the rules of the world for hundreds of years, if not millennia. As I was preparing and coming here this morning, actually I was on the train with my wife and she asked me, what am I doing here and what am I going to be talking about? And I said, I'm going to be talking about unconscious bias. Oh, she said, so not conscious bias like you practice at home with me then, she said. Okay, that was a great start to the day. Default man, and then I thought, maybe to sort of break the ice, I tell a little anecdote about my kids who are now well into their 20s. And the way I normally tell this story, because one was born in Belgium, one was born in Switzerland, and they're both Francophone, French-speaking. I normally start the story by saying that my kids have an older son and a younger daughter. The French call that le choix du roi, the choice of kings. And as I played that through in my mind, I immediately thought that is an example of default man thinking. The choice of kings is that I have an elder son to inherit my crown and a younger daughter to marry off and take over that land. So right there, for hundreds of years, if not millennia, right, the idea of default man is sort of well established. So I regard myself as a default man in reform. I can't change who I am who I am, but I need to understand about my tribe, about how we interact with society, about what happens in an enterprise, a business like mine, and ultimately what reform looks like. If you could flick to the next slide. Default man, the moment I read those words for the first time, which was in 2014, it was in this edition of the New Statesman magazine. As you can see, the front cover is very tongue-in-cheek. It talks about watches and fast cars and the whitest of men and a revolution in beards. And I thought, okay, I've got to buy this because, somebody's been inside my brain, right? And I found this wonderful world of, describing my default setting that I'm just totally unaware of, and the rules-based world that we're in that is being defined by people like me. Default man feels that he's a reference point from which all other values and cultures are judged. We define what is rational, and the other is irrational, right? Default man is the zero longitude. It's the Greenwich Mean Time of human behavior. This is Grayson Perry, dressed as default man. This is Grayson Perry dressed as himself. He's an artist, an author, a broadcaster, and he's a transvestite cross-dresser. But he is the one that wrote about the idea of default man, and it just absolutely resonated with me. Because I see myself, I can't change the tribe that I'm from, that's my tribe, but I have to understand what my place in society is and what my responsibilities are. I'm sure you've had lots of statistics, you can have a few more in a minute, But just, and we heard some earlier as well, just after lunch, but this is the consequence of default man. And by the way, that's the SDGs. My life, I'm on my way to New York tomorrow. It's United Nations General Assembly and Climate Week. A lot of those characters that you just described, Rick, will be there. Maybe I'll avoid a few of them. But this is what's going on. I mean, I think you recognize these topics around the gender pay gap. The thing that really hit home to me, I wear the SDG pin. You've probably seen a few people around with these. I wear mine every day. Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever, I think you had Unilever here earlier. We were at a conference. He said, I'm not going to take mine off until 2030 or until these targets are met. Now, no country is going to achieve gender parity by 2030. So I'm not taking this pin off, as simple as that. But let me hand over now. Could you just go back one? Just a couple of other points on there. I think these are topics that, as Rick was pointing out, women in politics, thankfully, we're seeing some progress. I wish we're seeing more, frankly, because we might avoid some of the issues that the world is facing right now. And in management, it's less than 1 in 3. But as I've pointed out in DSM, at least there we're breaking through. And one of the reasons why, by the way, is because we have a balanced approach to shortlisting. We insist that the shortlisting must be 50-50 as a way to drive that change. I'll talk some more about my experiences, but you're probably wondering why I brought along my token female colleague here. Just to make me feel a lot better about myself, right, Benkisu? I'll let Benkisu introduce herself and maybe go through a few more facts and then perhaps hand back to me if you don't mind afterwards. Yeah. Benkisu, you got a mic?
I think this is also working. So thanks, Jeff. And as he said, I tick all the boxes. So I'm from Turkey. I'm young, I'm female, and I'm in science role, so I'm a product engineer. So I do tick all boxes, and that's probably why you wanted me to join. Exactly. As a default man, he has to prove and confirm, right? But actually, I will be a little bit more provocative today. So if we go one slide. Yeah, so if we, when we talk about actually equality at workplace, I've heard several years ago from a TED talk this phrase, privileges are not visible to the ones who don't have them. I think this is all about that. I'm not going to go through all the numbers. Some of the statements are, I think, important, especially in workplace when we talk about gender equality, how female experiences and how male experiences the environment. When we talk about promotions, 50% of men actually experiences promotions being very equal, just, and objective, whereas you see a decline in the experience of the female workers. So it's again, if you have the privilege, it's difficult to see it actually. Can we go one more? And another thing is, women feel that they don't get enough support to be able to raise their hands. We talked in the morning to ask and to raise the hand. When we talk about, organizations, there is quite a bit politic going around in organizations. And actually, women feel not supported to deal with this organizational politics, whereas for men, it is the environment, the default environment that they're already in. So these are some of, let's say, the research. I got these from Lean In, another, organization that we talked in the morning. These are some of the numbers or some of the statements that come out from the workplace. Can we go one more? So, but when we think more about being the only one in the environment of men, actually it's not so much about being different, but it's about being the only one. So the not being able to find the people like you actually makes it more difficult for women. So that's also what research shows so far. And women rather feel more under pressure to perform and to show the perfectionism. But all these are things you've already heard, actually. What I will tell you about is a little bit of personal story. And actually, we talked about comfort zones as well in the morning. And now I'm going to put two people outside of their comfort zone. One is myself, and the other one is Jeff. So I told you I don't listen, you know. I'm a little bit of a rebellion. And what I will talk about, and what has been key for me to overcome some of the challenges that I experienced at workplace, was actually mentoring. And Jeff has been my mentor for the last 4 years. And now I will talk about this special relationship we have at work, and also about the unspoken parts of this relationship. So,
That's not what we agreed, but please go ahead.
So I met Jeff 4 years ago. It was a super intense business meeting. He learned in the meeting that I was working on a revolutionary new product. And then right after the meeting, he came. He was the VP strategy. I was an intern, very shy. You know, I wouldn't talk and stuff in the corner. He came to me and he said, "You need to tell me about what you're doing." And he actually listened. And he actually took me serious. I mean, he was the first one who took me serious in the company. So at that moment, I was amazed. I was amazed that, you know, someone, VP strategy, talking to VP strategy would have been only in my dreams at that moment. And I was like amazed. And afterwards, I started working at DSM. And a couple of months later, I was struggling so much. I felt so dark at the office. I am in an innovation environment. 15 men. Age is like average 45. And
So young then, actually.
yeah, exactly.
Thank
So
you.
we are two women, and one of the women is in US. So I mean, basically, I'm the only one. And yeah, it's all about this, you know, the tough environment. And I was really struggling. My manager proposed and enrolled me to the official mentoring program of DSM because he knew otherwise I was going to just go, you know. So it was a very good manager, thanks to that. But and then at that moment, there was only one name in my mind. I said, okay, Jeff has to be my mentor. I need to learn how to think strategically. You know, I have to. But to be honest with you, if it was not for the official mentoring program, I would have never come to you. If it was not forced, it wouldn't have happened, actually. Because Jeff, being a great person, you would recognize, if you observe him at work, he's rather reserved on expressing his emotions, you know. Things are mainly rational. We need to do it like this. And we started, you know, mentoring, and it was after 6 months, I saw a slight clue of an emotional expression. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's also human. I was like shocked. And actually, that was one of the breaking points. To be honest, for the first 6 months, I went to every single mentoring session that we planned, but I didn't felt fully comfortable. I was doing it just because I felt committed, actually. But afterwards, something changed. What changed is that we start building an environment of trust. And this is a cliche. When you talk about mentoring, you have to have an environment of trust, right? But now I will tell you how to build it. Because when you look at Jeff and when you look at me, we are two very different people. I mean, not only the identical or the, you know, physical attributes, but also personally. I'm an extreme extrovert. He's rather an introvert. For me, connection is meaning of life. He rather to connect more functionally. For me, if I make a decision, there's a pinch of emotion for sure. And for him, it has to be rational. And of course, structured. But besides that, what we realized is that we start connecting on a deeper level. We actually found out that although when you look at us, nothing is in common, our values were in common. And talking about those values actually takes time and courage. Now, when we talk, we understand each other because we know on which value basis we base our communication on. I think that was one of the key things that we have done. And besides that, also during our sessions, it was the moment when actually he started asking to me advice. It turned into a mutual sharing rather than just being a one-way directional, let's say, communication. It's not a communication at that moment. It's just you still start feeling the little one. But the mutual sharing actually brought us to an equal. And now, if I may, I think it's a sustainable connection which empowers and develops both of us in many ways. So then, yeah, and that's why I came actually to explain this.
Appreciate
and
that.
This is a moment of vulnerability, actually. So this is another one of that.
So that was painful to sit through.
I can imagine.
But I appreciate it. But thank you. So we had talked beforehand about what the event was about and what I wanted to get across. I didn't quite know all of the words, but all of it's true. By the way, you can see I am somewhat reserved. I'm that mould of British reserve, I suppose. I do see rational explanations, although I would say that I do understand that we really base our decisions on emotion first and then post-rationalize. But you're absolutely right. Could we click to the next slide? I see myself very much as a work in progress, and I think probably many men would see themselves in that way. And your 5 categories certainly resonate with me. And the chap I was thinking of is myself. And at any one moment in time, I can see myself in all 5 of those categories. And I had one of those epiphany moments this morning, as I said, when I thought about my usual story of Le Choix du Roi, just as a nice throwaway line, as a way to introduce a nice chunky story. But right there, I was hit. Okay, you're back in category 1 when you think like that, because that is where we started from. This is also where we started from. This is from January this year, just after Davos. I published something on LinkedIn, which I was really struck by Greta Thunberg was actually demonstrating in Davos about system change, not climate change. And I work a lot of my life is about addressing climate change. So I actually wrote what I thought was a very interesting blog post about the topic, about system change. And it really started a deep conversation about Default Man, because I used this picture, which was the only picture that I had, which showed the venue and showed me and showed, unfortunately, 4 other default men. So all of the conversations, and there weren't that many, but all of them was about my lack of sensitivity and lack of diversity in the panel. Of course, I don't think any of the commentators believed that I was personally responsible for who was on the panel with me, nor was I personally responsible for the photograph that was taken that showed these, but that I had been so insensitive as to use that particular picture, even though every commentary knew that the topic was an important topic, this was what they wanted to pick up on. And of course, I went into default man defense mode. I went very rational. I found out how many sessions we'd had in that venue, 27. I'd found out how many of those had less than 50-50 male-female representation, 7. So I started explaining how unfair everyone was for picking up on a very, unfair point. And really, you want to be looking at what I'm saying over here. Don't bother about that. And you can feel the emotion in my voice even now about this. And I knew somehow I needed to get this out of my system. And I was talking to Penkiso about this. And I was trying to figure out how this was relevant to our conversation today. And she stopped me. She said, "Jeff, you really don't get it, do you?" And I said, well, I do get it. I'm just explaining what went on. For God's sake, I do get it. She said, no, you really don't get it. And I said, well, what am I not getting? She said, because Jeff, now you feel exactly like we feel all the time, because you're being judged on something other than what you're saying. And that's what you face, right? Constantly. And that was a very powerful learning for me as well. So even before I got here, I've learned a lot about myself, and I hope come a little way along the journey. One final slide, back to the beginning. The tribe. We need to create self-awareness. I'm trying to do that for myself. Please help people like me. Society needs to hold us to account. Enterprise, places we work, we can create values-based cultures, as Benkisu said. And reform is a personal responsibility, in my opinion. So that was what I wanted to share. And thank you, Benkisu, for being so brave and for sharing very openly the journey we're going through together. Much appreciated. Thank you.
So thank you very much. You can imagine how much fun I had preparing this conversation. So we will go to the next and the last speaker. He's a Swiss-Italian. He studied in Slovakia, of all places. He used to be a UN worker and worked for very, very valuable projects like female rights, but also projects regarding girls in underprivileged countries. And now he decided to work for an organization, also a UN company, NGO. It's called Organization to Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Do I pronounce it right? Which is an interesting company as well. So please welcome to the stage, Paolo. I'm going to Bernasconi.
Yes, hello, and thank you for being here. It's really a pleasure to be among this group where I would say I feel more at home in my office. Of course, please don't tell to my colleagues tomorrow, but this is probably more my kind of audience that I'm used to. And if we go to the next slide, so I was, as it was mentioned, I was working for the United Nations Population Fund, so we were working on gender-based violence, on adolescent sexual reproductive health, sexual rights. So it was really very much in gender projects. And then I moved to the OPCW, the Technical Secretariat of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which is basically an international convention signed on by 94 countries, almost the entire world community. And so we are working on disarmament. It's the most important disarmament treaty in the world. We are working on peace. So I thought, since our Secretary General of the UN says that basically women's participation makes peace more durable, and if you really have women at the table, that is where peace really happens. So I'm coming there, used with my background with UNFPA, and I'm coming to the OPCW and expect to see what the Secretary General has said. And I'm having my first meeting, and I'm looking around, and 12 men around the table. So, okay, that is not what I'm used to. So indeed, I'm coming to an organization where we had 10% of leadership was female, 8% of senior management was female, and the overall among professional staff was 20%. So that's where I found myself to bring into life what our Secretary General says about peace. And so we had to do some work. And what I wanted to present you today is actually what we have been doing at the OPCW and how I, as head of HR, have been, on one hand, an enabler of certain activities that have actually changed the culture, but at the same time, how I, as head of HR, without noticing it, have actually also failed certain activities that were supposed to create more inclusion. So as a head of HR, actually as a white male head of HR, you can be both an enabler, but actually, without noticing, you can actually also be the one who thinks initiatives. And so this is what I wanted to explain. So, but one important thing is we have started to turn this around, and we'll see that later on. It's because it started with the top. We have now a new Director General who clearly said from the first moment, I want to have more female on the table. I don't want to have what we have now, which is an organization that is male-dominated. We have a lot of course, of military officials because chemical weapons, I mean, who deals with chemical weapons? First of all, soldiers, and secondly, male soldiers. So first of all, it's really changing the top. We have been pushing anti-harassment training. We have been pushing a different training on diversity inclusion with a specific gender bias module that we have made for all staff mandatory. Recruitment selection, I will speak to that later on, and also what we have done in order to, because of course if we want to have more women in the workforce, we need to start with recruitment, we need to start actually even before recruitment, we need to start with sourcing, so I'll speak to that later on. And we had also some activities that we had planned on leadership, female leadership. I'll speak to that later on. But let's maybe go to the next slide. So recruitment. So we are doing unconscious bias training for all our recruiters. It's mandatory for staff who serve on interview panels. And we have also a specific gender tracker for our adverts. So when I came in, I looked at our job description and I said, okay, doesn't really look appealing to me. So if it's already not appealing to me, maybe for someone else also not that much. And we checked it, and in average, our job adverts at that time had 75% words that were geared more towards a male population. So obviously, if you have adverts that 75% only speak to men, you attract only men. So you can't have quotas for the shortlisting or for the interviews if you don't even get them to apply because they're put off by your advert. So this was an important, so we had a recruitment marketing company that looked at how we actually source. Where do we go sourcing? Of course, if you only go sourcing in military institutions and in very specialized technical institutions, again, you only source the men. So we started, even before the recruitment, we started at the sourcing. And there's one thing where actually I have blocked something that could have been interesting. We were discussing whether we should hide the nationality and the gender in our application, so that when the panel gets an application, they wouldn't know if it's a man or a woman. And then I said, no, but we want to increase female among our staff, so we need to see that this is a woman so that we can shortlist or at least give a chance to this person. Yes, this is my thinking. But the other 3 panel members don't think like me. So just by assuming that everybody thinks like me, goes into a panel, I go into a panel, my idea is I want to increase the gender quota. But maybe the 3 others don't have my same assumption. So by actually at that time, I said, no, we don't need that because actually it will prevent us to actually increase the women quota. Actually, I think I made the wrong choice. It would have actually helped us because very few of us in the organization think like me. So I cannot just, because I think like this, all the other white men that we have around the table, all the soldiers and the officials, they do not think exactly as I do. So that was like one mistake I had. And also what we started is to build, like to attract female candidates for future positions, so to build also pipeline, because you cannot just, you have a post, you push the button, and then you have female applicants. So we started to create also pipelines where for positions that may not be ready right now, but that might come up in the future. And then I created, and I was really proud of this program. I called it the Emerging Women Leaders Coaching Program. And I really was very excited about this program. For me, of course, as a white male head of HR, coaching is something positive. I have myself a coach. I pay her quite expensive. She's not cheap. She's fabulous. So for me, coaching is something valuable, is something that I have chosen myself, and is something that really helps me grow. So I assumed this is something good. So if we offer coaching for our female leaders, that's actually something that will be valued. Now, okay, we were choosing the target for this program and emerging female leaders. We didn't have too many. So actually we were just able to fill all the spots because at that time we didn't have too many. So basically all the female leaders were emerging female leaders. So they all went into, so basically all those with supervisory functions. So they all went on this program. And the program sank. The program didn't fly at all. What happened? In this organization, because it was such a male-dominated, such a chain in command, military hierarchical organization, coaching, before I came in, was actually something bad, because women in performance appraisals were told, oh, you communicate badly, you are too assertive, oh, you need a coach. So basically, my assumption, coaching is something really good from my white man perspective, but in this organization, coaching was something bad. So the women, first of all, they didn't choose because they were the only one with supervisory function. So they had to go into this program. They had to have a coaching. So it was something imposed to them. So the program totally sank. We are now reproposing it, but now in the meantime, we have gender focal points. We have a gender working group, and they are now designing it. It's not me anymore with all my biases designing it. I'm sure it will fly much better. We also have established, as I mentioned, gender focal points. So every division has now a gender focal point. We have also encouraged men to be gender focal points. We wanted 50-50. We are not yet there, so it's like 2/3, 1/3, maybe even 80-20. But at least we have now in each division somebody who pays attention that this very masculine, this very testosterone society is slowing down a bit. I was last year at the conference, and I was presenting about the OPCW and how we do actually staff engagement. And there was like the public, and so I speak. And then I said, we at the OPCW, we allow our staff to be vulnerable. And then I explained. And then somebody in the audience tweets that. The head of HR says we allow our staff to be vulnerable. Next morning, I come into the office. I hadn't even reached my office on the 3rd floor, 9 o'clock. I bumped already into 2 staff who came to me, we allow people to be vulnerable. The OPCW, we work in Syria, we go under the bombs and that. And I said, but that's exactly how we are able to work in those contexts, because we allow people to be vulnerable. Because otherwise, if you would think that we are just Superman going somewhere, it was a difficult discussion, because for them, vulnerability is not something good. And so slowly these gender focal points are really trying to turn around a bit the culture in their own divisions where they belong to. There is another, so I'm Swiss, so I'm carrying many biases, unfortunately. Swiss carry a lot of biases. I don't know if this is us, but a lot of us do. So I was working in a Muslim country, very Muslim country, and the office, in the cafeteria, we had one big table. And so everybody was sitting at the same table. And I liked that because it looked inclusive. It was like something, we feel like a family. For me, from a democratic perspective, everybody is equal, the equal footing, so it was perfect. And then after some time, I noticed that the women were sitting on the sofa, particularly certain women, more elderly women. Every time I would pass by, they went, okay. And then I realized, okay, maybe I have to pay more attention. Why are they sitting there? And I asked one of my assistants. He said, no, because you have your armed guards here, and particularly also you are white and you are the head of office. They cannot sit at the same table with you. And I didn't even know that. I was so proud, we have an egalitarian office and everybody sits at the same table, and excluded like this very high amount of elderly women who were working for us. And just by dismantling this huge table and making small tables, this sometimes a really small design can have such a profound effect, because then everybody was able to eat at the same time, and they didn't have to wait until everybody, or at least until the men had finished eating. So it's important that sometimes we think that we do an inclusive action, and an inappropriate inclusive action can actually become an exclusive action. This is what I learned from this experience in Ingushetia. Yeah. And so just to end up, really, it is critical in an organization like ours to raise awareness. First of all, my organization, we had to really raise the awareness, the discomfort that our managers had with female leadership, because they were not used. They're coming from organizations where there's hardly any woman in a leadership position, either culturally or because of the organization they're coming from. So first of all, really show this, address this discomfort, and then try to work around it. And we still have a testosterone culture. I'm sure my female colleague will attest to that, but we are working to improve that. And how we are doing it, we are also working on the managers. We are working on senior managers, we are working on middle managers. We are having a number of trainings that we have made mandatory, particularly also for managers. What we also did, we did a little interesting exercise, analytics exercise. We checked all the performance appraisals of our staff and looked at words, whether women or men, whether there was a difference. And then we realized that in a number of female performance appraisals, there's the word happy. There was no man that had the word happy in the performance appraisal. I don't know how happy, being happy is part of a performance, but... And then another thing we noticed was that in female appraisals, there was the word strong. It was in no man's appraisal because men are considered to be strong, so you don't need specifically to point that out. While women, and it's not always a positive thing if you have in your performance appraisal that you are strong, and no man had that. So we are also now starting to work on the language, not only of our job adverts, but actually also of our performance appraisals. And last thing, we are also looking at team building exercises, because we had this manager who was telling me, oh, I have this wonderful culture. Every Friday at 5 o'clock, we meet for drinks. And okay, then I'm not so much a drinking type, so that's, again, one of my Swiss things. But once I go up there and say, oh, where are the women? So, yes, it was a very inclusive culture, but from his perspective as a military soldier, that's what you do at the end of a week. You meet with your buddies and you drink and you feel that you are a very inclusive manager, while excluding all the female part, because first of all, it wasn't interesting to them, and secondly, they had to go home. So why would they spend time to tell like stories from the army? In our organization, when they came in, some of our staff would even call each other by the military rank. I mean, I am profoundly, and don't tell that and don't tweet it, I'm profoundly anti-military, so I should really not work here. So for me, like to go to the corridor and see staff talking to each other using military name, that was not what was for me. So, and we come to the last slide. What we have done now, we really have been able to change at least. We have now 50% of men, women in top management. We have 33% in middle management. We have 26% among professional staff. So we have the numbers, we are slowly turning them around. What we need now to do is to create this inclusive culture, not that they come in and they go out again. Thank you.
So we heard quite a lot about numbers, about statistics, about getting measurements in, getting systems changed, you know, on a corporate side, on what should we do different. What I was very curious about when I was prepping for this panel discussion is to make it a little bit more personal. So the question that I asked as preparation, and I see Rick already like, oh yeah, here it comes. What was the unconscious bias that you became conscious about in the last couple of years or months on a personal level? So, who can I give the microphone?
I guess to me. Yeah, so actually when Shayla asked me this in preparation, it surprised me how unprepared I was for the question. But there are a couple things that came to mind, and one of which was I realized that I sort of intellectually believed that men and women are totally equal intellectually. What I had not realized was how much the world has been designed for men, especially physically, right? And as Shayla mentioned, I have two daughters, and they're both teenagers, and this has become especially visible. I've become especially aware of this recently, you know, as they're going through puberty, and their experience is different from mine was as a teenager. And this is the kind of thing that I'm now working in an office which is on 90% of days I'm the only man in the office. It's also something I'm becoming more aware of just on a professional basis, is just, are we, what is our work setting like? And what have previous work settings I've been in, which were male-dominated offices primarily, how much has everything been designed, from furniture and and systems and schedules and things like that. So there are all sorts of things that I've now become aware of, even just to the point that like we have, co-ed restrooms in our current office, and we have a kitchen, and I sort of assumed that an office filled with women would have very clean kitchen, and we don't. And so I've become aware that that was an unconscious bias that I had. So anyway.
Thank you for that, Rick. That like we discussed this morning, is that we mentioned, we all have unconscious biases. We all have them. It's not, you can't deny it. And the beauty is if you can find a modus where you become conscious of your unconscious bias so that you can actually do something about that. I have my unconscious biases. Of course, I have them, but we're not going to talk about them today. So if I can ask you, Bengushu, your unconscious bias.
My unconscious bias. Actually, I was also very unprepared because I always thought, I'm the subject of unconscious bias. I thought I never had any unconscious bias, but it's again quite personal. In my country, if you're beautiful, you need to be fit, you need to be thin, you need to be, presentable. And all my life, actually, I tried to achieve that, and I couldn't still. And I noticed, actually, I relate this, the size of a person sometimes with the discipline of the person would have. And the reason for that is myself, actually, because that is what I relate in myself. So with your one single question, I went to a full self-reflection, and then, but yeah, it is something now, I'm aware, and I know why I think that way. So it's not, yeah.
I like that because I think we can relate to that in a way, right? Yeah, I can. I see you guys, so yeah, okay. Thank God. Jeff.
Well, I think I've spoken about a couple of incidents that, and for me, it's a self-awareness thing. I mean, as I said, this thing about le choix du roi, which I've used so many times, telling a story to so many people in different contexts, and it was only because of the context of this that I reflected more deeply on the cultural origins and the cultural consequences of those kind of biases. It's just so deeply ingrained, at least for me, that it took something exceptional, and I regard this as exceptional, and the preparation for it to really make me reflect deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I don't have another example that I'd like to share, but I would like to reflect on the need for that really deep reflection and understanding, and the need for people like Bengushu, who, by the way, is a beautiful person, to continue to point these things out, right? I mean, don't be shy. Hold us to account. Everyone asks for feedback in the moment. They're generally looking for compliments, but feedback in the moment is, Jeff, do you realize what you just said? Think of it from my point of view. Please do that.
Please,
yeah, I also gave a number of examples where all my many biases have come actually in a way, and those are most related to gender. But what I realized here at work is actually that I have biases also. So I have like my team and white men, almost all, and what I have is like I'm really fast. So I think fast, I act fast, I decide fast, and I assumed, since there were white men around the table, that they were like me. So if I'm fast and I take decision fast, why do I need to think 2 days about it? And I realized that I was losing my team because I was going and really didn't pay attention, because I assumed, since those are white men, like me, and Europeans on top of it, that we were the same. So that actually prompted the reflection, really. If you are working with people and if you are like having your staff, you really have to go to meet them where they are. Because it's not them who will come to meet you where you are, because that doesn't work. So you have to go. And I started then to pay more attention, not because I'm a white man, that all the white men are actually like me. So that for me was also something that, oops, maybe I need to slow down a little bit and really make sure that I carry people with me.
Yeah.
That was for me important. For me, was gender bias was always regarding to women. I realized, no, it can be also towards men.
It can be two ways. Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for your sharing of your thoughts. And I can imagine that, thinking about your own biases, unconscious becoming conscious is like a revelation. It could be a revelation. So, working with this subject and thinking about it, you certainly come across moments of gender, even bias, unconscious bias or bias in general. What do you do to address that? Do you address it?
Yeah, so Paula, our psychologist, she's our staff welfare officer, once told me, pay attention to your management meetings because there is something off at your management meetings. And so I thought, okay, I thought my management meetings are okay, but and I started to look into it, and I actually realized that women were interrupted so much more than men. And since I am a man, of course, and I'm the head of HR, nobody interrupts me. So actually you realize those biases only if you're at the receiving end of it. But since nobody ever interrupted me, I actually didn't notice that we have, it's like 2/3, 1/3. So when the women were talking, the men were jumping in more. So that's when then I said, can we please let her finish? And can we please be a little bit more disciplined here? So that's when then I started. But the problem is that either you are super assertive and you're looking, and I'm not always in the heat of like, we need to do things and everything is busy and fast. And so if you have somebody that helps you point out to it, then it's important that you address it, because that's the thing. But you wouldn't necessarily realize it because you're not at the receiving end of it.
Is there anyone of you would like to address this question, Rick?
Yeah, so I've decided to be a more uncomfortable friend because I realize that it's often in the most private circles where you hear things that are, the most deep-rooted. And I realized that some of my closest, oldest friends, people I've been friends with literally for 40 years or whatever, say things that we talk about shared values, and these are people who I usually assume my values are 100% aligned because, we grew up with the same experience, et cetera, et cetera. And then I realize I hear something and I'm like, that is not my value. It may be a joke, it may be some silly reference. And so I've started, and it takes courage. And this is something that, I have the potential to lose friends, which none of us likes to do. But I've realized to me it's that important, is to call out. And I figure I can start with my closest friends because hopefully I'm not having too much at risk there. But if I do, then that really tells me something. So I'm becoming a less comfortable friend to some of my best friends.
And you have all your friends still there?
So far.
Okay, good. So Jeff, a question. What can we do as we're sitting here listening to your stories? We encounter biases as well. So what can we do? What can we do? We, women.
Thanks for the question. I was also, when I was sitting here waiting for the panel, I was also thinking about, my role on the panel and how default man would act, would expect to answer the questions and would expect that the focus would be on me. So I thought in that moment that when that happened, I might say, perhaps you'd like to rephrase the question and ask Benkisu instead. But on this occasion, because it wouldn't be fair to do that, I will try and answer it. I mean, as I said before, I regard everything as a learning opportunity, and every conversation is. Not every conversation can you have that depth of thought, which is why you're right. In those, unguarded moments, circle of friends, that's where people say those, ridiculous things or have those thoughts that really shouldn't be shared. But I do think it's a question of, of being courageous and speaking out at the moment, as Benkisu does with me, and says, Jeff, you're just not thinking. This is what's going on. This is what's happening, and what you're experiencing in this incident. Imagine it from my point of view. So that's what I would ask: is continue to hold up the mirror, hold this tribe, my tribe, to account, and help us perhaps be a better part of society. Let's put it that way.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes left, and we're opening it up for the audience. So, there's a lot of. Okay, we need more time, ladies. I'm going to give you the mic. Start. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kathy. I'm from Denmark, and I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to tell you that I am so pleasantly surprised, because this topic, I feel, has been around for so long, and I usually hear very general answers and comments, and I feel that all of you were very honest, very vulnerable, and my hat's off to you. And I think you have to, as you said, you have to be brave, and you have to show up and speak up. So thank you so much.
The lady, over there.
Hi, I'm Olga. And yes, thank you so much for being here. This is great. We'll love to see men at women events. And my question is something that on panels like this, usually only women are asked, and we're completely excluding men by never asking the men this question. So that's why I'm going to ask you this question. How do you balance family and work life? And do you feel that, as a man, do you feel supported by the society to do what it is you want to do and to live your life to your full potential? And are there things that we as a society can be doing better for the men?
Excellent question. Who is going to answer this one? Rick, I see you glooming in the... I think all three needs to answer this question, right?
Absolutely. I wish I could say that I were doing a much better job than I am. I'm definitely not. My wife is an accomplished professional in her own right. She has a PhD and a law degree, but still has definitely made most of the sacrifices. And I mean, it's not even close. And that is not something that I'm proud of. And I'm, trying to sort of belatedly figure out how can I balance the equation before my judgment day. So that's the one thing, I guess, my first reaction. And then my other reaction is it's been hard, and I'm not looking for sympathy. But, especially I think there's this paradox where as you get higher in organizations and you have more responsibility, you tend to feel more responsibility to do the job and to make other sacrifices on behalf of the work. And when in fact you really have the power to change. And I think too often I've defaulted to, well, honey, I can't be there for my kids this evening because I've got to do this for my job. When actually what I should be doing is telling my job, actually I got to be there for my kids.
No, I won't add anything. I see the 1 minute sign, and I agree absolutely 100%.
Would you like to say something? No?
I mean, I don't have family, so I assume it's like everybody else. It's like taken for granted that I'll do the long hours because I have nobody at home that is waiting for me. So
that's a bias
I
as
think
well,
a lot
right?
of single person can relate to that.
And that's a bias as well. Yeah. Last question.
Well, thank you very much. I also don't have a question. I just want to make a compliment to you, even kijken hoor. Paulo, yeah. Because in such an organization to have such an goals in this topic, it's I think a very good, very challenging and really great to see how you the success you made. So it was more a compliment. Yeah. And I want to nog one little. Also want to, of course, compliment Ben Guichou. Yes. And I want to tell you the biggest challenge is in the coming 4 years, because you will be growing, you will turn it around, and you will be the mentor of Jeff.
Thank you. Well, can I have one question? Yeah, there's a guy who has a question, and he was the first one with his hands up. So I. So maybe in the closing panel they will be back. We can have. Yeah, I know, but it will be fun.
Just to answer the question about how do men balance their life balance, I also think one of the problems for men is, I think that, my personal story is that I think when I was married, I think sometimes you think you always have to live up to the standards of your wife. And I think sometimes men have different values. And I think looking after your children in a different way, I think I found my wife was more perfectionist, and everything had to be right, and I was a bit more laissez-faire with things. And I think sometimes that's also the difference between the sexes is, are you sort of doing it jointly, or are you doing it on behalf of your wife or in your wife's way? And I think that's something, as women, you also have to think about as well when you're sharing responsibilities. And I think sometimes it puts men off because they feel they have to do it. There's only one way of doing it. And I think there's various ways of doing it. And I think if men were more allowed to sort of be themselves, and sometimes, not always, women were less critical, I think it would be easier.
Interesting discussion. I think we definitely need more time on this one, because I see faces here in the audience like, bring it on. So, I'm gonna... Which one? Vicky's question. I need to take Vicky's question. We will have your question.
You say I've got a big voice. It's quite a short question, but it goes back to your rating scale of blokiness, the 1 to 5. It's great, and I think most men I know would perceive themselves as number 5. But let's be fair. Let's look around the room. That ain't the reality. So back to this morning's question, and what's everybody going to do to pay this forward? Honestly, it's wonderful within the confines of this room, how we post on social media, but really, what is everyone going to do differently to actually break that? This is my badge, I think I'm a 5. But believe you me, I have met many over the many years in corporate and non-corporate life that believe they're a 5, in reality they're a 1. Or somewhere at best at a 2. So, and I'm really staring intently there. It's not just a question at you, you've put it out there, that rating scale, but how do you do it differently? How do you pay it forward? How does it really change?
Because I think, also with the question of what should women do differently, we need to be aware of something. Yes, we should be equal, but there are also some differences we have as men and women, right? Emotional intelligence is a gift we have, right? What I do every day, I look at the men that I encounter. I didn't know the scale before I had other scales I used, but I would rank the man according to my emotional intelligence, where is he? And I will strategize how to conquer that man. This morning, Penham also mentioned, this is not about bonding and sharing only this meeting, it's about strategizing. And that's what I do every single day.
I think these are great last words. Absolutely. Rick, Ben Guichou, Jeff, and Paolo, thank you so much for joining this stage.